Hi friends, today we are going to disco down with Shed 7. This is a bit of a throwback, but an amazing track to drum along to. If you want to see the playthrough, I'll link that up here. And if you want to grab, as always, the notation, that will be free from the link in the description as well, so you can follow along and learn this track. This is at 113.75 BPM, so I'll teach everything at 114, but the track is a smidge under 114 BPM. There are 5 or 6 sections that we need to learn to nail this track, so let's get into it. Our first beat is our basic disco groove, which is going to last through the whole track pretty much, and we're going to stamp on the bass and the hi-hat pedal at the same time, open the hi-hat to play that in between, stamp on it again with the bass. We get a disco beat that sounds like this. The transition into the first verse is on the snare, starting on the and of 3 of this bar. And we're going to play the and of 3, the 4, the and of 4, and the ah. So we're going to play and then crash into the first verse. So that bar on its own sounds like this. We then get into the main verse groove, so all we're doing here is adding the snare on beats 2 and 4 to give some extra punch to this groove, and we end up with our main disco beat for the track, which sounds like this. The transition into the bridge is then similar to the transition we played into the verse, but we're going to add another snare before the third bass note. So on the ah of 2, we're going to play snare, and then we're going to play the same snare phrase as we did going into the verse. So that will sound like this. I'm actually going to slow that down to 94, so we'll take 20 BPM off to play it nice and slow, and I'll show you what that looks like at 94 BPM. Into the bridge groove, we're keeping that new note on the ah of 2, but we're going to play it as a ghost note in the bridge groove. We're mainly playing the emphasis on the snare on the E of 3 and on the 4. So if we play that bar on its own at 94 BPM, it sounds like this. And if we speed that up to the full tempo of 114, it sounds like this. The transition from the bridge into the chorus is where we play our 4 loud crashes simultaneously with our bass. The timing of these 4 notes is that they're all dotted 8th notes, so they're all 3/16. The way to count this, if you're counting 1 E and A, 2 E and A, is to count the 1 when you're closing the hi-hat. The E is when you're playing the bass and the crash for the first time. You're then leaving a gap of 2, so you're leaving and A, and you're then playing again on the 2, E and, A, 3 E and. If we demonstrate that at 70 BPM, so really nice and slow this right down and get used to maybe the feet to start with. So what I did was get the left foot closing the hi-hat and then immediately playing those 4 bass notes. That sounds like this. Once more. When you're comfortable with that, you can add in the crash. We can then add in the snare at the end of this bar, which is on 4E and. We'll leave the other snare in the middle of this bar, so let's just do the same as we did, closing the hi-hat, bass and crash, add the 3 snare hits at the end. And then we can add in the other snare, which is on the and of 2. And if we play that up to speed at 114, it sounds like this. We then go back into our main groove with the snare on 2 and 4. We play that for 3 bars, and then for the 4th bar of the phrase, we play a bar very similar to the bridge groove, but without the ghost note on the A of 2. So we're still keeping that snare on the E of 3 and on the 4. So that kind of nice kind of bridge groove thrown in there at the end of that 4-bar phrase. So we loop that a couple of times. And then if you spin down to the 5th line of the notation, again, link in the description below, at the start and end of this line, there's a new transition bar. It's basically the same at the start and end of this line. So this transition, we're playing bass, hat, snare, bass, and then snare and hat at the same time on the and of 3. And then we're playing 4 and a. So that bar, if we slow that down to 94 BPM, that bar sounds like this. We then crash back in to our 2 and 4 on the snare and then repeat that bar again. So this line in its entirety at 94 BPM sounds like this. The very last thing to learn then is the final bar of the track, where we're finishing things off with the open hi-hat on the 1 and 2 and. For the first 2 of those, we're going to play the snare. For the very last one, we go over to the floor tom and the bass. And then on the 3, we close the hi-hat. So it's a nice tight finish. So that bar sounds like this. So that is everything you need to learn in order to be able to play Disco Down by Shed 7. Again, if you want to grab a copy of the notation, I'll leave a link down in the description below. And if you want to see a playthrough along with the notation so you can see how all the parts fit together, I'll leave the link up here and at the end of this video as well. Thank you very much for watching, have fun with it, and I will see you in the next one.